Here are the two macro lenses which I own. I bought this one, the 60mm 2.8, some years ago when I was, I'm tempted to say upgrading, but that's not necessarily true. When I was converting, shall we say, my preferences in lens acquisition to autofocus. And this was inexpensive and a Nikkor and in really nice shape and really inexpensive. So I said that already, whatever. So I bought it just to have it, right? Kind of like, you know, why I bought that, the 20mm autofocus lens. You know, autofocus is the way, just might as well pick one up. So it sat around for a while. I really haven't done much with it until I started digitizing film with the ES2, and I used this on the D700 when I digitized negatives. So other than that, it doesn't get a whole lot of use. Well, then a couple years ago, I bought this one. So this is the Tokino 100-2.8 macro lens. And I bought this because a couple years back I used to watch a lot of videos by what's Ken's? Wheeler, the angler photographer. And he was on a kick about this lens for the longest time. And I think after the 99th video when he said, "If you don't buy this lens, you're an idiot," I finally broke down and I was like, I don't want Ken to think I'm an idiot. So I bought the stupid lens. And it's not a stupid lens. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a perfectly good lens. Has a really nice manual focus field. This is the nicest manual focus field of any AF lens I've ever owned. Seriously, I mean it's as good as, if not better than, most manual focus lenses. So for that, it's really top notch. I think I paid about $400 for this thing new, because you couldn't find them used because there just weren't that many out there, because the only people buying them were people who watched Ken's videos. I mean, it's a nice little lens. I have no complaints about it. It's a little, well, I was going to say big and heavy, but compared to what, right? Well, compared to this. I mean, here's a 100 with 2.8. This is the Nikon Series II 100-2.8, which is just as sharp as this one, has far better bokeh, in my humble opinion, is a much better portrait lens, and is lots smaller and lighter and cheaper. You can get a nice one of these for about $100 now, although, you know, given the current economic turmoil, how low those prices are going to go is anybody's guess. So, but if you need a 100-2.8, this is a fine choice. The only reason to pick up one of these really is if you need autofocus or macro capability. So those are my macro lenses. Now, why do I mention this? Because for those of us who occasionally suffer from the phenomena referred to nowadays as gear acquisition syndrome, which simply means, you know, photographers who like to collect stuff. It's not hoarding, it's gear acquisition syndrome. That's a totally different thing. So, but in case you're concerned about your level of gear acquisition, here's a way to know whether or not you need a new macro lens. Okay, here's a little thought experiment I'm going to propose. So, I don't know about where you live, but where I live, we've been in lockdown now for almost 6 weeks. The conditions are going to start easing up, I think, on beginning next week. We're going to open back up gradually. Supposedly, but that's a good solid 6-week lockdown where I live. And during that period of time, I did not once grab for either one of these lenses and start shooting still life objects or still life images of household objects. And I certainly could have. I mean, I have a halfway decent coin collection, and I'm sure I could have done a few compositions with some old silver dollars and bicentennial quarters and wheat pennies, and the kind of coins that kids used to collect in the late 70s. So, but I haven't done that. Now, if I've been sitting at home, bored out of my skull, just itching to get out, start taking pictures of something, anything. And yet, I have not, under these circumstances, gotten into macro. I think that's a pretty safe indication that that's just not my thing. And please understand, I'm not finding fault with macro photography. There's plenty of people who do it really well. I'm just not one of those people. And if you've been sitting at home for 6 weeks and you haven't dusted off your old macro lens, I think it's safe to say you probably don't need to buy another one. You can strike that off your list of things to buy once the lockdown ends and you go back to your job and you start buying stuff again. If you haven't been shooting macro now, it ain't gonna happen. It's just not. I mean, under what other circumstances can you imagine a greater temptation to get into macro photography? I mean, if you're into photography, which you obviously are if you're watching this video, and you've been sitting at home for a month and a half with nothing to do, and you have not pulled out your macro lens for a single shot, I think you can say with reasonable certainty that that's something you can probably strike off your list. Just not something that you need more of. On the other hand, if you've been going nuts trying to find a decent macro, if you don't own one, and you've been going through your lens collection looking for one that has a decent close focusing ability because you have this really awesome bowl of fruit waiting over by the north-facing window, well, maybe you should invest in a macro lens when things open back up. They're not expensive. That is one advantage that macro photographers have over, say, portrait photographers. Your average macro lens is much less expensive than your average portrait lens. Okay, those are just some random thoughts, and I hope you found it useful. And if you liked the video, if you did, please subscribe and check out the links below. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.